Hi everyone, my name is Zach, and in this video I show you how to create your own custom texture brushes for Blender Sculpt mode. For this I will show you two different workflows. For the first workflow we need a 2D image manipulation program like Krita in this case. It's a free and open source tool, but you can also use GIMP, Photoshop or basically any other 2D image manipulation program, because we are just doing some very basic editing by converting a photograph into a grayscale image. And I guess you can even do it with Blender's Compositor. For the second workflow we only need Blender, and there we will generate a height map out of real 3D geometry. And at the end I will show you how to set up these brushes in Blender so that you can start sculpting. Alright, without further words, let's get started. Okay, to create the first brush I open up Krita. Krita is a free open source painting application which you can download for free, certainly on krita.org. And usually I use Photoshop because I am used to it, but I also like Krita a lot, so I really can recommend this. So I downloaded an elephant skin texture on Pixabay, and this we will edit for our brush. So the first thing we need is a square format and a not so high resolution. The higher the resolution, the slower it will be on sculpting. So I would recommend something about 512 by 512 or 1024 by 1024. So let's go to Image, Resize Canvas, and let's go by 1024 by 1024. So in this way I just crop the canvas and don't scale the image. So when I'm done I hit OK. Now I use the scale tool, and by holding down Shift I scale this, otherwise I would stretch this and this I won't want. So I scale this down, move this over here and choose the area I want to have in my texture, and then I hit Enter. So next thing is we go to Filter, Adjust, HSV adjustments, stands for Hue, Saturation, Lightness, and let's set the saturation to -100. Okay, now we have a black and white image. The next step is Filter, Adjust, Invert, so we invert the image. Then again we go to Adjust and go to Levels, and here basically we can control the contrast. So if I move this over here, you can see the dark areas will be darker, and if I move this here, the white areas will be brighter. So something like this. Okay. And the last thing we do, we go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I find out that on the sculpting this looks a little bit nicer if we blur the image a bit, because we have this very fine details here, and since we don't have this ultra high resolution on our mesh, we can't really see these details, and then we just have an uneven surface. So by blurring this image, this will look better. Something like this. Then hit OK. And that's it basically. Now we go on File, Save As. And this one I call Skin Brush, and I choose PNG image, Save. And you can uncheck the alpha channel if you like, and then hit OK. And this is our first texture. If you ask yourself why I have inverted this, you don't have to. But I find out that it somehow looks nicer if we invert this image and then use the subtract option in the sculpt brushes. So you will see how this will look like. So for creating the scales brush, I open up my creature, go to this layer down here, and here we have our 3 scales. And I just take the clean or the simple scale, press Ctrl C to copy this. And then I open up a new blend file. Now I delete the cube and Ctrl V to paste the scale, and with Alt G I recenter this scale. So let's remove the timeline, and up here let's switch to the 3D view, and with numpad 0 I switch to the camera view. Let's select the camera, press Alt G, Alt R to reset the position and the rotation. And now we are basically doing the same thing as we did for the cute monster fur brush we created in Blender. If you did not watch this tutorial, I will show this whole process again here, but pretty quick. So first of all, let's move up the camera 1 Blender unit, set the resolution to 1024 by 1024, 100%. I have cycles render enabled. At the camera settings we set this to orthographic view, and let's set the orthographic scale to 2. Now also let's enable mist under display so we can see the mist distance, and this we will set up in a moment. The lamp we can also delete. And now let's first of all duplicate the scales. So I press Alt D, move it over, and down in the left corner you can see on the X direction 0.25 in the negative direction. And if I now hit Shift R, this will be repeated, my last action. Now let's press Alt D again in the other direction, 0.25, Shift R. Okay, now let's select all these here, press Alt D, move it down, and 0.125 in the negative direction. And let's see how deep we are doing this. I would say 0.18. Now let's select the others as well and move them basically in the same distance. So, and again with Shift R you can repeat the last action. And as you can see, pretty quick we duplicated all the scales. Now let's set up the mist parse. So I select the camera, under the render layer I enable mist under passes. Then we can go to the world settings, and here we can adjust the mist parse. Let's set this to 0 and this to 1, and then we can better see it. Now I hold down Shift and move this down to the top of the scales, and this in the other direction to the bottom of the scales. Let's go to the render settings, sampling. Here we put the render samples to 32, we don't need that much. And one other thing I would do, I will select everything except the camera and rotate this 180 degrees, because I want the scales point in this direction so we don't need to rotate the brush later on. Now let's hit F12 to render. So now we have this nice shape, but we don't want to have this render here. We want to use the mist parse. Let's check this button, then we better can see it. And this one we still need to invert and adjust a bit. So let's switch over to the node editor, enable compositing nodes, use nodes, and backdrop. Now I press Ctrl Shift left click on this render layers, and then we will automatically add the viewer node. In this case we want to have the mist information, but we want to invert this. So I press Shift A, color, invert, and add this over here. And to see it better, or to make the contrast a bit stronger, we add a converter color ramp over here. Oh, let's move this in this direction, and then at some point you can see the scales pretty good. So, and this is basically our scales texture. Now let's switch over to the UV image editor. Down here we switch to viewer node, and this we can save by pressing F3. And we save this as black and white image with 16-bit and call this scales brush in our brushes folder and save as image. And again with F3 I will save this as JPEG, black and white, and call this icon, and why you will see in a second. This blend file we can save, and now let's switch back to our creature. So now let's quickly set up our sculpting brushes. Creature selected, let's switch to sculpt mode. Select the sculpt draw brush, hit the 2 button, and let's call this skin. Go to texture, new, call the skin and hit the F button so this will stay saved. Then go to the texture settings, open, and in our brushes folder we can use the skin texture. In this case we need to subtract this because we have inverted the image. And then we have this nice result if I sculpt this here. Under strokes I increase the spacing to 40 or 50. So if I paint in one row we have this little space between the dots. And under the texture settings I enable area plane, rake, and random. So we have this nice random rotation, and every dot looks a little different. And for the final sculpting, I would recommend to put the strength not too high. So I put it a bit lower. Maybe something around 0.1 is nice. Yeah, this is the skin brush. If we want to change the image here, we can go to Options, Custom Icon, and load it from the brushes. As you can see, now we have this image here. And now let's create the Scales brush. For this, again, I select the Sculptor brush, hit the 2 button, call this Scales, click New, save the texture, and open up the PNG image of the Scales brush. Here we also use area plane. The difference between view plane I can quickly show you. If I sculpt on a very low angle, you can see this will be stretched. And if I set this to area and sculpt here, there will be no stretching. So that's why we always change to area plane. Then we also enable rake. This is important. And just a little bit of randomness, not too much. Also under the stroke, we can increase the spacing to 40-50. We can also change this later. And that's basically everything. Now, if I sculpt here, you can see how we can sculpt this nice scales on the surface. So, and if we want to change the image again, let's use a custom icon. And for whatever reason, I can't load in the PNG image, then just nothing showed up. So I just saved this again as a JPEG image, hit accept. And then you can see we also have this nice image here. So we know exactly where the brushes are. Alright guys, that's it with this video. Now you have a basic understanding how to create your own texture brushes for Blender Sculpt mode. And the cool thing is, after you have set up this blend file once, you can use it over and over again. Just replace the objects with other 3D objects and then hit render again, and then you will have your new brush texture.